It started with underwear. Not metaphorically, not as a symbol. Literally, women began throwing their underwear on stage during Tom Jones's performances in the late 1960s. At first it was a joke, an event, an anomaly, a thing that happened once, and then became a thing that happened again, and then again. And then it was reported in newspapers. And then it was something that television hosts mentioned. And then it was simply the thing that everyone associated with Tom Jones, whether they had ever seen him perform or not. By 1969, it had become part of the story people told about him. Tom Jones had not asked for this. He had not engineered it. He had not rehearsed it, or manufactured it, or requested it from his management as part of a promotional campaign. It had simply arrived, the way certain things arrive in a performer's life, uninvited, unstoppable, and permanent in their consequences. It arrived without invitation, and it stayed without permission. And it cost him something that took decades to name. Tom Jones in the late 1960s was at the peak of his early commercial power. It's Not Unusual had been a #1. What's New Pussycat had reached millions. Delilah was enormous. This Is Tom Jones was running on ABC and drawing the biggest names in entertainment: Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, Janis Joplin, to appear alongside him. He was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most successful entertainers in the world. And none of that was what people most wanted to talk about. What they wanted to talk about was the image, the open collar, the hip movements, the women in the front rows, the things being thrown at the stage. Tom Jones was 29 years old. He had grown up in Pontypridd. His father was a coal miner. He had come to London with nothing but the voice. He had spent years building a career that he believed was about the music, about the specific, physical, demanding, extraordinary thing that happened when he stood at a microphone and sang. He was now famous, above all else, for something else entirely. He went to Las Vegas. He did the residencies. He performed in the showrooms. He wore the ruffled shirts and the velvet jackets. He put on a show. Because putting on a show was what the market had decided he did. And he was extraordinarily good at it. Let that not be lost in this. Tom Jones in Las Vegas in the 1970s was one of the finest live performers working anywhere in the world. The voice never diminished. The power never faded. The connection with an audience never became mechanical or hollow. But he knew what was not being seen. He knew what the image had covered over. He said things about it over the years, in interviews occasionally, in conversations with people who knew him, in the way he chose to talk about his influences and his musical education and the singers he admired. These were not complaints. Tom Jones was not a complaining man by nature. He said things the way someone says things when they want to be understood without making the conversation about grievance. He pointed toward the music. He talked about singers. He talked about what it meant to really sing. Not to perform, not to entertain, but to actually sing. There is a difference, and he had always known it, and he kept pointing at it even when the conversation kept moving in a different direction. He talked about the music, about the specific pleasure of singing well, about what it meant to hit a note that required everything he had, about the singers he had learned from, the gospel singers, the soul singers, the blues singers, who had shaped his voice in ways that had nothing to do with the entertainment spectacle he had become. He talked about Pontypridd, about growing up in a place where singing was not performance, It was simply what people did, where the voice was a thing you had or you didn't. And if you had it, you sang. He did not talk very much about the underwear, but the people around him knew it bothered him. Not because it happened, but because of what it meant about how he was being received. Tom Jones kept working. He kept performing. He kept singing with the same power and commitment that had always defined him. The voice did not decline. If anything, it deepened with age, added texture, added a kind of lived weight that younger voices cannot manufacture. Tom Jones remained successful. He remained a draw. But there was a quality to his success that carried an asterisk, not in his own mind, but in the minds of people who decided what was important in popular music. The 1980s were difficult in their way. The culture shifted. The artists who were celebrated were younger, edgier, newer. Tom Jones was associated with a different era. He kept working. He kept singing. But the cultural conversation moved somewhere he was not quite invited. And then, in 1999, something happened that nobody had predicted. The image was not wrong, exactly. Tom Jones was a physically imposing performer. He was magnetic on stage, in a way that was both musical and physical. The voice and the body were connected. He could not sing the way he sang without moving the way he moved. It was all one thing. He did not intellectualize it. He did not calculate it. That is worth pausing on. When Tom Jones moved on stage, it was not choreography. It was not a practiced routine designed to produce a specific effect. It was what happened when a voice of that power moved through a body that could not stand still under that kind of pressure. The soul and gospel and R&B singers who had shaped him moved when they sang. They moved because the music demanded it. Tom Jones was the same. The movement was the proof that the singing was real. But the way the image was used, the way it was sold, the way it was amplified by television and tabloids and the entertainment press of the era, simplified him in a way that he found, over time, quietly devastating. He was not a sex symbol who happened to sing. He was a singer who happened to have a powerful presence. The distinction mattered enormously to him, even when the world insisted on ignoring it. The music press of the era was not kind to him on this subject. There were critics who dismissed his work as entertainment for women who were not really listening to the music. There were reviewers who found reasons not to engage with his voice seriously because the context around it seemed, to them, too populist, too physical, too obviously commercial. He felt this. He was not unaware of what was being said, and he could not fully answer it without pulling against the very image that was selling out his shows. It was a trap built out of success. Consider what it means to be famous for the wrong thing. Not for something bad, simply for something adjacent to what you actually are. Something that is real, but that is not the center of what you are. Tom Jones had the most technically gifted voice in British popular music of his era. Critics who were willing to engage with it seriously acknowledged this. The control was extraordinary. The range was wide. The power at the upper register was almost unreasonably large. He could do things with a melody that most singers could not approach. This was the center of what he was. The more successful Tom Jones became as a live performer, the more the image consolidated around the phenomenon of his audience's reaction. The more the image consolidated, the less seriously the music press took his voice. The less seriously the press took his voice, the harder it became to be seen as an artist rather than a spectacle. And the harder it became to be seen as an artist, the more his career came to depend on the spectacle itself. Tom Jones was 58 years old. He had been singing professionally for 35 years. He had been famous for 34 of them. He had everything, and he had, in the eyes of the music industry, something close to nothing. He was a legacy act, a memory, a name from another time. He went into a studio and began recording an album called Reload. The concept was deceptively simple. He would record duets with artists who were current, who were younger, who came from musical worlds very different from the one Tom Jones had built his career in. Robbie Williams, Karis Matthews, Stereophonics, Portishead, Moose T. The people around him were not all confident this was the right move. It was a risk of a specific kind, a risk that the collaboration might feel like an older performer trying to seem relevant by borrowing relevance from younger artists, that it might look desperate rather than generous. It looked like neither. Sex Bomb was released as a single from Reload in 1999. It reached number 3 in the UK. Tom Jones was 58 years old, and he had a top 5 hit with a song that was, among other things, deeply playful about the image he had spent 30 years trying to escape. Sex Bomb did not deny the image. It did not fight it. It did not apologize for it. It took the image and made it funny and self-aware and honest. And in doing so, it transformed it from something that had constrained him into something he now owned. This was the liberation that the image had never allowed him while he was in the middle of it. He had to get old enough and far enough from it to look at it clearly. And when he looked at it clearly, he found a way to use it. The Reload album went multi-platinum. It reached audiences that had never heard Tom Jones perform. It introduced him to a generation for whom he was not a memory, but a discovery. But the more interesting thing about Reload, the thing that the chart positions and the sales figures do not fully capture, is what it said about the voice. Reload was not a nostalgia record. It did not ask the audience to remember what Tom Jones had once been. It asked them to hear what he currently was. And what he currently was turned out to be something that could hold its own in musical worlds very far from Las Vegas showrooms and 1960s television studios. He went into those sessions as an equal, not as a guest. The artists he worked with knew it. You can hear it in the recordings. There is no condescension in either direction. There is only music made between people who respected each other's craft. The voice on Reload is extraordinary. Not because it is a voice that is not aged. It has aged, in the way all voices age. But it is a voice that has become more of itself over time. Richer, more particular, more fully inhabited. That voice had always been there. It had been there in the Las Vegas showrooms. It had been there in the television studios. It had been there before the image arrived and after the image took over, and through all the years when the image was the thing that people saw first. The image had been the cover. The voice had always been the book. Tom Jones, in the years after Reload, spoke about the career differently than he had before, with more equanimity, with something that sounded like a hard-won peace. He had found a way to carry both things, the image and the artist, without letting one cancel the other. Which is this: a man from a Welsh mining town was given one of the great voices of his century. He sang with it for 60 years. The world tried to reduce him to a spectacle. He endured that and went on singing. And when he came out the other side, the voice was still there, older, deeper, more certain of itself, and the world finally heard it properly. That is not a story about an image. That is a story about a singer, and it is the one that lasts.